And we are live.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining today. I want to welcome you to our panel. We're going to be talking about radio royalties for artists, a little bit about songwriters, but mostly about artists. And we've got a great panel here. I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves. Tierney, do you want to kick it off and tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, my name is Tierney Johnson, also known as T Double. Born and raised in Austin, Texas. Hip hop artist, producer, songwriter, studio owner, and founder of the Urban Artists Alliance, which I founded to help artists create sustainable revenue through their music, through their productions, through any other type of thing they're trying to do. And happy to be here and talk about royalties and everything else with you guys.
All right. And Gwen, what's your background?
Hi, I'm Gwen Seal. I'm an attorney at Mike Tollison and Associates here in Austin, and I represent musicians, songwriters, artists, professional wrestlers, and just overall creatives.
And my name is Chris Castle. I'm a music lawyer in Austin, Texas. I also have the honor of being the director of the Entertainment Law Institute in Texas for the next couple of years, and wanted to do a lot of work in policy area and as well as traditional artist representation. So, Sean, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, and then you can give us some background on Sound Exchange as well.
Sure, but I have one gripe to start off. I don't ever want to follow you three again because I'm not that accomplished. So next time we do this, and hopefully there's a next time, I need to go first. But really quick, my name is Sean Glover. I'm from Chicago, Illinois, the south side of Chicago, Illinois. I'm a director of industry engagement at Sound Exchange. Been here for over 15 years. Been here since the beginning, so I've seen the industry change and evolve and morph into what it is now, and it continues to change. So we make sure that creators are fairly compensated and compensated on time to the best of our abilities.
Great. Well, Gwen, why don't you give us a little bit of the copyright posture on the performance royalty and sort of where we're how that fits into the song side as well.
Sure thing. Can we get the slides up real quick? Perfect. So thank you, Chris. We are going to briefly delve into some basics of music copyright, just because they're easily misunderstood, which is understandable because these concepts are just confusing. And then we're going to just briefly touch on some of the various royalty streams pursuant to music, just so then that way we're all on the same page as we begin discussing this legislation. So as it relates to copyright, there are two distinct copyrights for music. On the one hand, you have the musical composition, which is also referred to as the song. The musical composition consists of the lyrics and the melody. So at the point at which a musical composition is fixed in a tangible medium. So let's say, for example, Tierney has written lyrics and melody on a piece of paper. So he has a fixed musical composition copyright. Tierney, being the party who has written the lyrics and the melody, he is the songwriter. Tierney, absent some sort of written agreement to the contrary, also operates as the music publisher. Now, the music publisher's job is to go out and administer and exploit that musical composition. So Tierney might be trying to get this song cut. He might be trying to get that song licensed. So just keep in mind here, we have the musical composition copyright, which consists of the lyrics and the melody, and the party who writes that the lyrics and the melody is referred to as the songwriter, and absent some sort of agreement in writing to the contrary is also the music publisher. So on the other hand, we have a separate copyright, which is referred to as the sound recording. It's also known as the master. So let's go back to that example with Tyranny. Let's say that Tyranny has recorded himself singing and playing keyboard. At the point at which he has that recording, he has a sound recording copyright. Tyranny, being the artist who is performing on that sound recording, is the artist. And absent some sort of agreement in writing that says otherwise, he is also the label. And the label's job is to administer and exploit that sound recording, distributing and selling that sound recording, trying to get that sound recording licensed. So just keep in mind here that we have two distinct copyrights, and then there are revenue streams that apply to each. So on the musical composition side, you have the mechanical royalty pursuant to Section 115 of the Copyright Act, the compulsory mechanical license. So mechanical royalties pertain to the mechanical right, which is the right to reproduce and distribute a musical composition that is embodied in a sound recording in an audio-only format. So whenever records are sold or music is downloaded or streamed, these royalties are owed to music publishers and in turn songwriters. So record companies and streaming platforms pay these royalties. And in order to get paid these royalties, if you're a songwriter, you might have a music publisher. And so the music publisher will be paying these royalties to you. You might be using a music publishing administrator, or you might be using an aggregator service like a Song Trust or like a TuneCore Pro. And so these parties are going to be paying out the mechanical royalties to you as a songwriter. It may be that you are a songwriter who is self-published and you administer your own publishing. And so in that event, you would affiliate with the newly formed Mechanical Licensing Collective to collect these mechanical royalties whenever your music is streamed on streaming platforms like Spotify or Apple. Now, who sets this rate? The Copyright Royalty Board sets this rate. Now, I'm not going to go into the Copyright Royalty Board and all of the inner workings there, because that would just be like another 2-hour presentation. But just keep in mind here that essentially the government sets this rate. On the other hand, we have public performance royalties. And so these royalties stem from the public performance right. And so that is the right to perform musical compositions embodied in sound recordings publicly. And so the parties who pay these royalties are music users like terrestrial radio stations, venues, streaming platforms. And so they license these rights through performing rights organizations, being organizations like ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, GMR. And so if you're a songwriter or music publisher who is wanting to get paid these royalties, you can do so by affiliating with one of these performing rights organizations who pays out these royalties to you as a songwriter and as a music publisher. Now, who sets these rates? These rates are set by rate courts or they're negotiated. Now, let's jump over to the sound recording side. So artists are owed royalties when their recordings are sold or downloaded or streamed. And so these royalties are paid by record companies or streaming platforms. Now, in order to get paid these royalties, it might be that you're signed with a label. So that label will be paying these royalties to you. Or you might be using a digital distributor or an aggregator like a DistroKid or a CD Baby or a TuneCore. And so those parties would be paying out these royalties to you as the artist. Now, who sets these rates? These rates are negotiated. Finally, we have the public performance royalty pursuant to the Section 114 compulsory license and the Copyright Act. Now, who pays these royalties? Only non-interactive streaming platforms, also easily referred to as digital radio. Non-interactive streaming means that the user isn't actively selecting and choosing what music they're listening to at a given instant. So just think here like Pandora or Sirius. These are like digital radio platforms. Now, in order to get paid, featured artists, non-featured artists, producers, sound recording owners collect these public performance royalties through sound exchange. and Sound Exchange administers this license and pays out these royalties to artists and to sound recording owners. Now, who sets this rate? The Copyright Royalty Board sets this rate. Now, I think it's worth comparing the public performance royalty on the composition side versus the sound recording side. So you'll see on the composition side that terrestrial radio stations pay these royalties to songwriters and music publishers. That's not the case on the sound recording side. Only these digital radio platforms are paying out these royalties. And so that's the purpose of the American Music Fairness Act. It would, in essence, close this loophole. Because without the American Music Fairness Act, there will be no performance royalties payable to artists and to sound recording owners from terrestrial radio. So with that, I will shift this back over to Chris.
So let's talk about how we got to this point, given the construct that Gwen just identified here. You could ask, why is it that we pay royalties on digital radio, let's say, and not on broadcast radio? And this is where a page of history is worth a volume of logic. So the history on this is that sound recordings were not included in the 1909 Act because we have sort of the 1909 Copyright Act, the 1976 provision of the Copyright Act, and then a few bills subsequent to that modified the 1976 Act. So we'll start with the 1909 Act. That, of course, didn't include sound recordings, mostly because there weren't a whole bunch that were around at that time. And it covered the quote-unquote writings of the author. So, I mean, just for a reference point, magnetic tape wasn't really invented until World War II. So, you know, we had a lot of years there where there was no real interest in sound recordings being considered part of the federal copyright law. We did have state law, though. And that all got very confusing, patchwork quilt of rules. So there was an effort to amend the Copyright Act for that and other reasons that started in the 50s and went through the 60s. But due to widespread piracy in the sort of recorded music boom era of the late 60s and 70s, Congress passed an interim measure called the Sound Recording Act in 1971 that extended federal copyright protection to sound recordings. And that was confirmed a few years later when they finished the 1976 provision of the Copyright Act. So this is where you get the pre-72 masters, which you've probably heard of, because the Sound Recording Act of 1971 was effective February 15th, 1972. So that's why you have this distinction. And, you know, for those reading along at home, check the Flo and Eddie class action against Sirius and Pandora, and that will tell you all about 372 masters. The Sound Recording Act basically got fixed by, in large part, not for the broadcast royalty, but in other ways, got fixed by the Classics Act, which became part of the Music Modernization Act in 2018, thanks to the efforts of the RAAA, AFM, SAG-AFTRA, Recording Academy, many other people. So even after that, though, radio still did not pay a royalty for the recordings, just for the songs. Now, flashback, in 1995, Congress passed the Digital Performance Right and Sound Recording Act, which established a performance right in digital transmissions of sound recordings, not over-the-air broadcasts, but digital transmissions of sound recordings. And then they expanded that right in 1998 with the Digital Millennium Copyright Act that established a compulsory license for non-interactive transmissions and it's also established Sound Exchange to license and collect the royalties. So under that new compulsory license, which is in, as Gwen said, in Section 114, G, I believe, the royalties are split 45% to featured artists, 5% for non-featured artists, and 50% for sound recording copyright owners. That's important to remember because the American Music Fairness Act, as we're going to discuss, carries over those revenue splits to terrestrial royalties. So all artist royalties are paid off contract, which is another important thing to remember if you're a signed artist, so that those monies are not applied against unrecouped balances. That's very important. And one of the reasons that that's the case with Sound Exchange is because Sound Exchange has always had strong artist representation on their board, and there's been a consensus amongst the artists, independent labels, unions, and major labels that are on the board that practice should continue. So I'm fully expecting that will continue with any broadcast royalties. Broadcasters have successfully resisted paying a performance royalties for sound recordings for terrestrial for over 100 years, which is consistent, or rather inconsistent with the laws of practically every other country in the world, other than North Korea and Iran. So consequently, American performers don't have a legal right to reciprocal treatment when their repertoire is performed in other countries, which means that because we don't pay a royalty here for broadcast radio, even though they're playing our records abroad and they're paying an artist royalty to their artists, we don't get that money. And that's hundreds of millions of dollars every year, which we're denied because we don't get reciprocal treatment. We don't give them reciprocal treatment in this country. So the American Music Fairness Act changes that situation so that performers can be paid for terrestrial performances of their recordings. So that's sort of the history. And now, Sean, I've got a few questions for you, but first, why don't you tell us a little bit about Sound Exchange and how it works and what it does?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chris. And you kind of touched on it just now, but Sound Exchange is the organization that collects and distributes the digital streaming royalties and non-interactive. That's a very important distinction that Gwen mentioned earlier. So if you just think of in the digital space, you just think of like radio-like. So for example, the radio is on in your car right now. You're just not listening to it. I'm talking about AM, FM radio, terrestrial radio. But when in the digital space, when someone listens to that stream, that is considered a performance. Let's say T-Double gets in the car. That's considered 2 performances. Chris gets in the car. That's 3 performances. So no matter where you get in on that stream, that is considered a digital performance, and it is subject to royalties. We also, the non-interactive piece is very important because the user has no ability to stop, fast forward, rewind, pause the music. So you're just at the mercy of the PD, the program director. So Sound Exchange is an organization that collects and distributes those royalties. That's our core business. But we also do some other things, such as we build amazing systems that allows creators to, allows us to process billions and billions. When I say billions, I mean billions of lines of data quickly. We also, I wish we stole this phrase from or used it before Staples, but we are the easy button because it's so simple to take advantage of our systems such as IRSRC lookups, claims and disputes. We make all of that easier for the creator, as you all know or should know in this business, that things are convoluted and murky and complicated for no reason at all. And what we do at Sound Exchange is we make that easier and simpler for the creator. And lastly, like Chris alluded to, we are big advocates for fairness and for artists. So that is in our DNA. It should be in everyone's DNA to be righteous, but it's definitely in the DNA of Sound Exchange. So, people often ask, what are you doing in Washington? Why are you all in Washington, D.C., being a music tech company? I said we were born here and we decided to stay here. This is not the tech hotbed or the entertainment hotbed, but we were born here, but we spent a lot of time humanizing creators because they are small businesses. These are people that have chosen art for a living, and we want to make sure that they're fairly compensated. And going back just a little bit, Chris, I don't want to get too far into the AMFA, but there isn't any. We were kind of born because of there is no terrestrial right. So what Congress did is when Sound Exchange was formed, I call it when the music industry flipped on its head, when everything became digital, they said, hey, okay, we don't have a right for the AM/FM from terrestrial, but for this new way people are going to consume music, everyone who has a that creates and earns money should be fairly compensated. And they told the artists and the record labels, you all need to get along to get along. So yes, we are governed by 9 representatives from the label community and 9 representatives from the artist community. So if you know anything about the music industry, these are 2 distinct groups that traditionally don't agree on anything, but for the greater good of Sound Exchange and getting people fairly compensated, they must come together to govern us.
Which is an important thing to remember.
Yes.
Because one of the things I notice is that Sound Exchange doesn't seem to have the problems that other people have, because you've got, the artists, we got everybody at the table, right? So you have a consensus and you have an organization that's used to operating by consensus. So just to turn back to the public performance right now, I know, the general reason that radio doesn't want to pay is because they don't want to pay, right? But what rationale do you hear from them for why there should be an exemption on the sound recording side when they pay on the song side?
Well, Chris, let's go back a little bit. I mean, I think I'm glad you gave a historical context, because I think that's important. You talk about the 1909 Act, which was, I guess, in effect before there was a sound recording. And that basically means there was a law before there was wax. So there was a law already in place before the sound recording, the record, was even invented. So believe it or not, when an artist was heard on the radio, that artist actually came into the radio station and played music. I wasn't alive then, despite these gray hairs, but this is what I heard. And this is fact. So what happened was, when the sound recording was created, the NAB, the National Association of Broadcasters and Radio, said, wait a minute, there's no law preventing me to play this thing. I don't have to fly T-double in to do this song. I can just play this record, aka sound recording. And if you look at an old sound recording, you can see, a record, I'm talking real legal now, hanging around you lawyers. If you look at an old record, you'll see inside the spool, it'll say not for radio use. And that's because the artist community was saying, hey, stop, I'm not giving you the right to play this. But there was really no way to enforce that. Now, I think you mentioned the 50s, Chris, and one of the biggest champions for all artists was Old Blue Eyes, Frank Sinatra. He started this thing rolling and saying, hey, stop playing New York, New York. Stop playing my song. People want to hear that song not because of who wrote it. They want to sing because they want to hear it because I'm singing it. So that got a lot of traction. And then, fast forward to Sound Exchange. You talked about the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, being born, where you have a precedence where, hey, you can pay everybody that is generating revenue and you're profiting from it fairly. So to answer your question, that was a long way to answer your question, Chris, but there is no excuse that they can publicly say for not paying anybody, but they do have one. So these are the 3 excuses that they rotate. One is it'll be too hard to do, be too difficult to do. The second one is, as a result, this is the one this really gets to me, is that it's promotional value. So as a result of playing an artist on the radio, you are promoting them. They get to go tour, they get to go sell records, CDs, and we make them famous. For those of you listening, don't ever take that as an excuse or as a reason for doing anything. For one, most of the music that radio plays is what we call in the business catalog music. So this is old stuff that people have already. These are the proven hits. So you ain't promoting Michael Jackson. You ain't promoting the Beatles. And I don't think Michael Jackson is touring anymore. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. So the other one is, this is the way, the other excuse that they rotate is, this is the way we've always been doing it. I scratched that second one. That's the one that really bothers me, because just because you've been doing something wrong for a long time doesn't make it right. So those are the three that they rotate. They cannot debate this in the public sphere, Chris, because you can't use someone's work, profit from it, and not compensate them. This is the only instance in America where that happens. Like, you can't take a book and make a movie from it and say, hey, as a result of me, taking the Da Vinci Code book and making a movie, I'm sure John Grisham is going to sell some more books. Yeah, he might. The other thing is that the artist doesn't have any say-so of saying, don't play my song. Not only do you have to ask the author to do the movie, you have to get permission for him to do it. So this is one of those things, that I know I'm on the right side of this. Once you explain it to people, the public, it's just wrong. Like, we used to have people work in this country for free, and we called it something else. But that might be too real of a conversation for this stream right now. That might have to be part 2.
Well,
Amen.
thought occurred to me as you were saying that. So there's some legitimacy, I think, as much as I hate to admit it, there's some legitimacy to the broadcaster argument when it comes to smaller stations, public stations, community stations. Yeah. So what are there protections built into the legislation, into the American Music Fairness Act, that would cover those people, or how are they going to be affected?
Absolutely, Chris. There are definitely provisions for that. So for I think for non-commercial and small radio stations, it's like local and college radio stations. I think it's like profits under $100. That there'll be provisions for them. So, but we can't get caught up into their rhetoric of rate, because that's a little trick that they do. Before we can even talk about the rate, they have to recognize the right.
Right.
So before we get into those weeds about rate, they must recognize the right, and then all of this can be worked around.
Right.
Yeah, but there is the short answer is yes. There are provisions for all types of radio stations, because all radio stations aren't created equal. There's the big ones, there's small ones, there's little ones, there's short ones, there's tall ones.
Well, along those lines, just to flip it over, do you guys have any estimates of how much money artists are denied in a year, let's say internationally in particular, because of the lack of reciprocity? Because I know Sound Exchange has the international mandate process, right, which is kind of a poor man's reciprocity, kind of a workaround on the reciprocity issue. But do you have any sense of how much money people lose every year internationally by us not recognizing the right here?
Yeah, great question. And this one is, this question is a great one, because when you think about radio, if we're being honest, radio now plays the same 9 songs, no matter where you are. The top 888 in Nashville is the same as in Austin, and is the same as in, Seattle, is the same as in wherever, Chicago. So when I talk to artists about this issue, there's artists that told me, Sean, I don't care about this. I'm not a radio artist. I'm killing it on TikTok. I'm on the gram. I have all this other stuff going on. I don't butter my bread on radio, AM, FM radio. My response to them is, one of this country's maybe biggest exports is music. And I think music is adorned and loved way more than it is here. I mean, they study our music. They teach it. They embrace themselves in it. And you know what else they do? They play it on their radio stations. And you know what else they do? Because they have laws over there that protects their citizens. They collect royalties off of U.S. artists' creations. And when they go to pay, you talk about the reciprocity, they go to send the money to the U.S. and there's this, wait a minute, there's no law in the U.S., so there's no reciprocity. So we get to keep the money and fund whatever the heck we want to do with it. So we've estimated that it's about $200 million of money royalties lost every year. And that's on the low end. And if you think about, and I talked about those countries, there's 4 countries that don't have this law, and I think it's North Korea, Iran, I think China, and another. I can't remember the other country. Oh, and the U.S. So these are the countries that the U.S. deemed the axis of evil. So these are countries that don't care about human rights, let alone artists' rights. So this is a list that this country does not want to be on, and for any stretch of the imagination. So it's estimated about $200 million a year. So that's why if you're not being played on the radio, you should care, because your music is being played all over the world and earning money.
Interesting. So Tierney,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about what you're doing and how this will affect you. I mean, do you have a point of view about this? I mean, when you're thinking about kind of your role in the industry, what's your relationship with radio like, and will this matter to you?
It definitely matters, and it probably matters, maybe more for like Black artists, hip hop artists, and R&B artists, because that's mostly where we're getting played is on terrestrial, right? We're not really going up to FM and FM stations anymore with our records, saying play our records and really pushing it to those airwaves. So when we're not getting paid for terrestrial, that's tons of money we're losing, because I can get paid as the songwriter and the producer, and I can get paid as being the label and owning the master. But when there's this other pile of money that I can add on top of that, and I'm losing that for whatever reason, then that hurts my growth, right? Because when you're an artist, especially now during this time of the industry, the money is dwindling. Not as much money is coming in for artists, but nobody's touring. Merch sales are down. So any dollar that we can add to our coffers through our talent is a plus. And we should continue to fight for that and be more educated about that. As Sean said, sometimes you talk to artists and they don't want to talk about publishing, copyrights, because that's not the sexy part of the industry. You know what I mean? Like, that's what nobody wants to talk about. But that's one of the most important parts. That's your longevity part. Like, you can keep that coming for a long time and on, many continents, as Sean said. So it's a very important issue. I mean, that's why when you guys brought it up to me to be a part of this, I was like, I'm totally down to be there and talk about it, because it affects me, multi-tiered, because I do everything myself. So I have to make sure that the music is played, it's getting paid, I'm getting my money from wherever it's getting played. And if I can't reach the dollars from these other countries and these other avenues, then that's stifling my growth as well.
Right. And when you talk to your friends and your other artists in your community, do you think there's awareness of this? I mean, do people know that they're not being paid for radio? Or do they think that they are being paid for radio? What would you say the awareness level is?
I don't think they think about that part, right? Like, a lot of artists just want to perform, right? They want to be on the stage somewhere. And that's, to them, that's their part of, my career is really moving. I'm actually doing something. But when the pandemic hit and a lot of artists couldn't perform anymore, then they kind of started thinking, maybe I should try to get in the sync. Maybe I should try these other avenues. But you have to really study and be educated on where the money is and what money you're already losing before you can take that next step to try something new. You're already losing thousands of dollars. So find out where that money is, get educated on it, and stand up and fight for it, because that is your money, right? Like, nobody wants, like, you wouldn't do tons of legal work for somebody and then, not send an invoice and want to get paid for it while they take your knowledge and they go on and make a multi-million-dollar deal, right? like like you should do for me. You should do that for me, Chris. You should, we go back like that. We should do that. But yeah. So, but it's all about educating artists, and they're slowly getting educated, right? Like I'm at the forefront of that in Austin. I'm the one who's really talking about it on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. Yeah, I'm on Instagram. I'm like, do this, do this, do this, because when I came up, right, there wasn't any of this knowledge base. You kind of had to learn as you went. So you made bad deals, you made bad agreements. And I was lucky to have people around me who already knew these things about publishing, copyrights. So at a young age, like 14, 15, I was already with BMI. So I already knew where I wanted to go and how I wanted to proceed and what I wanted to ask for when I got with a label, and ownership of my masters, ownership of my rights. And so I'm the artist, I'm the producer, I'm the record label, I'm the publisher, I'm the sync administrator. I do all that. So wherever there's a dollar that can be added to what I'm doing, hey, I'm all in.
Interesting. And so, do you find that people come to you, and what level of awareness would you say there is in the community about this legislation in particular? Are people finding out about it, or is it sort of a question mark?
As far as now with this legislation, a lot of artists, not even just hip hop, but rock, jazz, whatever, they're not really in tune to legislation, right? Like, with the Grammys, we do Grammys on the Hills and we did all that stuff. Artists aren't really in tune to that. So now, since I've been talking about it, we're doing this panel, we're all kind of with the bullhorn, artists are getting more aware about it. And, and when they can hear it from somebody they trust and who's been down that same path as them and telling them, hey, you should look into this, now their awareness is peaking.
Right.
So they're starting to get on the bus now, but it's still a slow process because, like Sean was saying, a lot of artists are still, they're still thinking exposure is the way to go, right? So they think if I'm on the radio in all these countries, it's great because I can sell records. But will you though? It's great because I can tour. But will you though? Like those things aren't guaranteed. But if your music's getting played, that extra money is guaranteed. If these agreements are worked out.
Well, somebody's making it.
Exactly. A lot of it.
Someone's making it. Yeah. Well, Gwen, how do you think in your practice, what do you see this legislation doing? Is it going to affect songwriters and music publishers negatively and benefit artists more, or how do you see it working?
No. So if you look at the legislation, you'll see in Section 6 that it says that nothing in the legislation shall adversely affect the performance rights of or royalties payable to songwriters and publishers. And so this language is great because it provides legislative intent. And so then that way, in the event that this legislation is passed, and then broadcasters try to say, oh, well, actually, let's advocate for these royalties on the sound recording side to just be carved out of what we're already paying on the composition side. I don't think that argument would really pass any muster with the CRB. So I think it's great that this is specifically spelled out in the Act. So then that way there's absolutely no confusion that these royalties are not going to affect what is paid out to songwriters and music publishers.
Interesting. Well, I also noticed that there's some language in there that seems to contemplate direct deals or the extension of direct deals that may be in place for webcasting royalties, for example, that protects 50%, as I read it anyway, protects 50% of the revenue for artists, or that would still have to be paid through on the artist side. And what that says to me is that preserves the non-recoupment aspect, so that if it does pass, artists will be in the same position on terrestrial radio as they are on digital. Do you think that's important? I mean, is that something that your clients would care about?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. Absolutely. Every dollar counts. And, I have clients whose music is broadcast on the radio here in the US. And guess what? They're not making a penny on the recording side. I have a client whose music has really not only taken off here, but particularly in Europe. and his recordings are broadcast all over radio in the UK, and he's not getting a penny. And that's just inherently unfair. And one thing that I think is also worth pointing out is there are a lot of songwriters who also are wearing the hat of the recording artist. And so I don't want any songwriters who are wearing, both of these hats to ever be gaslighted into thinking that, hey, I'm already receiving performance royalties on the composition side, so that's enough. I don't need any on the sound recording side. No, you just need to be fairly compensated for your work. And right now, that's just simply not occurring.
So, Tierney, would you say we've got a lot of artists here in Texas that would be affected by this? It seems like every artist would be affected, right? And,
yeah, every artist.
And it's going to be important to artists at all levels.
Yeah,
particularly artists who are trying to make a living. Like if you're a hip hop artist or you're a Americana artist, the kind of genres that we have a lot of in Texas. It seems like this would be important to everybody, right?
Yeah, it definitely will. I think this type of act is genreless, right? Because it affects anybody who's doing the music and getting broadcast on terrestrial radio, and that's everybody, right? So it will affect, in my field, urban music, hip hop, and all that. Most definitely, that's where we're getting most of our plays on mixed shows, and there's thousands of shows playing hip hop that we're not seeing money from. So it's genreless. I think everybody should, kind of perk up a little bit and be a little bit more aware of this act and what it can do for you personally, right? Like that's usually when people get aware of how it can really affect them. And once they see that this can be, some extra dollars, some extra income, they'll be like, I can really use that right now in some form, no matter how small or how big.
Well, and if people want to, since you mentioned it, if people want to take action here, if they're concerned or they're interested, there's a petition up that I think we'll put up either in the crawl or in the show notes. That's sponsored by the Copyright Alliance, and I know the Music First Coalition has one as well, and I Respect Music has one. irespectmusic.org will get you right there. So, Sean, do you think that it?
But can I add on that though?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
No, what Tierney said is right. Like it is genreless, and Tierney mentioned earlier, and I experienced the same thing, that artists really didn't. For some people, politics is a dirty word, and when you hear it and laws and stuff and Capitol Hill, it turned them off. But I will say that more recently, because of recent events, that just in general, people have been paying more attention to what happens with laws and how laws are created, how officials get elected. So I am noticing that the creative community, and not just them, but just people in general, are paying attention. So I think the time is right for this to happen, because it's not even, it's just, the word fairness is in the bill. It's the right thing to do.
Right.
Yeah. No matter what.
We have an opportunity.
Yes.
To your point, we have an opportunity to change this now. There's like a fair amount of impetus behind this. It's a bipartisan effort. It's one of the few bipartisan things.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's right. Right.
And so let's not let that opportunity slip away. So, if people want to take action, I think their representatives will listen to them, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
There's a lot of time, people feel kind of overwhelmed by the process,
mm-hmm.
But
yeah, and we're not. I was going to say we're about there's few things. I always say there's three things that unites us, and it's food is a uniter, sports, and music. Like we can come together for that. And I was just joking with somebody when I interview people. One of the things they always say is, and I really love music. And I'm like, who doesn't love music? Like everybody loves music. It's whatever it is, you love music. So you're right, Chris. It is one of those few things and rare things that we can all come together on and agree with, unless you're a broadcaster, unless you own a radio station. And I get it. And to the people, and if you own a radio station, I used to really angry, but I can look at it from their side. If I was a baker and I got flour for free, forever, I always got flour for free. Now you're gonna start charging me for flour? I might fight you. I might put up a little fight. I might put up a little fight.
And what we found over the years is that when you talk to people who actually work at radio stations, like Carolyn Kramer, who famously got fired, for supporting the Respect Act, was the precursor to this bill. The people who work with radio stations actually care about this and would like to be supported, but they're afraid,
absolutely,
that they're going to get fired, and they're for good reason.
Right. Just think about it, though. Just think about this, right? Yeah. Everyone who works at radio or performs on radio gets paid. That's everyone. It's the person who answers the door, the person who picks up the phone, the person who sweeps the floor, the radio personality, everyone, the accountant. Even if you have a sports team, let's say you guys are in Texas, what are you, the Cowboys? Yeah. Can you imagine them saying to Jerry Jones, "Hey, we're gonna play the Cowboys game on the radio," but as a result, they're probably people gonna buy jerseys and hats and stuff, so we're not gonna pay you for it. Yeah, Jerry. No, nobody would go for that. Yeah, the artist is the only person. The person that brings the person out is the only person that doesn't get paid. This is ridiculous.
Yeah. Right. And by the way, that's what people who work in radio stations will tell you privately, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah,
I feel bad. I get a paycheck. I mean, that's the most common thing you hear.
Yeah.
When you talk to them privately about it, it's like I don't want it, But on the other hand, they have to toe the line because that is their job. So Gwen, what's your view on this? You find that your clients are aware of the bill or aware of their opportunity to take action to support the bill?
I mean, I think that there's definitely more visibility now. But one thing I will say, I've talked to people running for Congress who were completely unaware of this. And so when you're talking about people who have, college degrees, maybe even law degrees, who are running for Congress, and they have no idea that this is the case, then, of course, like the music community and other people aren't going to recognize this either. And so I think that just, getting out here and making this issue more visible is so important. That's the first step. And then just, making it clear that, look, exposure doesn't pay the bills. Artists deserve to be paid fairly for the use of their works. And right now that's not happening.
Right. Well, and it's the thing to remember about members of Congress and staff is that if you ever go to DC, just walk around and think about everything that's coming in the door of these people every day, right? All day, every day, right? And it's all kinds of things. It's the entire business of the United States. It's the entire culture of the United States. It's every social issue in the United States and internationally, for that matter. And that's coming at them like a fire hose every day. So for them to understand this rather intricate subject, and we've been talking almost an hour now about this, and I'm sure there are people out there who are still scratching their heads like, wait a minute, it says what, why, how, and so if you're just sitting there thinking about this, and particularly if it affects your livelihood, so it resonates with you, imagine if you're sitting at a desk in the Capitol, and you've got 50 lobbyists who are trying to get you to do something about their issue, right? And in the minute or so you get to take a breath, you think about the music issue, right? And that's why it's important to sit down with people who are running for Congress, who are in Congress, or their staffs and try to explain this on a personal kind of kitchen table level to them, because they will listen. They do. It's not that they don't care. They will listen. And I think we have a better argument than radio has. And, look, they've gotten a free ride for 100 years. It's time to start paying, right? So it's not like they haven't made money off this. They have. But I think you shouldn't, underestimate your ability to have an effect on the outcome and take action and exercise your agency, to change, to bend the arc of the moral universe, So I think we're coming up on our hour here. Do we have any closing thoughts that we want to bring up?
I think artists should just stay abreast of laws, various acts that are being presented and passed and declined, and just be aware of where this can take your career. It's all beneficial towards you. It can only help you, not hurt you.
Wonderful. Right, exactly. Good point.
I'll just say, at Sound Exchange, we're going to continue to do our core businesses, but we do a lot of other things for you as a music tech company, and we want to make your lives more simple, more efficient, and also, without saying, we want to make sure everyone is treated fairly. So, as with this issue, we're going to make sure and fight with every breath in our body to make sure artists are fairly compensated.
And so, and to just extend that point, and then we want to make sure that people who are not registered for Sound Exchange or who are hearing about Sound Exchange for the first time today, go to soundexchange.com, right? That's the website.
Yep. Correct.
And sign up, because the membership process is so streamlined. It's very easy to do. I mean, you do have to have some information at your fingertips, but as an artist, you can register. They may be holding money for you already. So you need to check that out, and you need to get registered and make sure that if anybody else has registered your works up there, that they're done correctly. Because, as the money starts flowing through, you're only going to get paid if they know where to find you, right? And there's a certain amount of effort that you have to make on your own. This isn't going to happen by itself. So just take the time to sign up. So Gwen, did you have any closing thoughts?
Well, I just wanted to say thank you to all of the sponsors of this webinar. Austin Music Foundation, Austin, Texas Musicians, I Respect Music Austin, Sound Exchange, and Texas Accountants and Lawyers for the Arts. Thank you all so much for your support and for getting this issue out here to the public.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And all these organizations have done a tremendous job over the years in educating artists in Austin. And feel free to, hit them up for further information. Also, we'll have some stuff up there in the show notes and also on irespectmusic.com and or .org and Austin or artistrightswatch.com. You can find I Respect Music Austin on Facebook, just as Facebook I Respect Music Austin, and Tala and all these other organizations. Support them, help them prosper, because they do so much for our community. And a big thank you to ATX Musicians for just taking care of all of our broadcast needs on this. It's been very helpful, and we appreciate it. So thank you guys for participating. I think we'll call it there. Just looking, I don't think we have any questions. Yeah, I don't see any questions. So thanks everyone for watching, and watch this space. We'll update you as things change. And sign that petition.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having us. Thanks everyone. Great job, Gwen, Chris, Terry.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
All right, thanks guys. Talk to you later.
Right.